Let's talk about the Nakba. The Nakba is one of the most important things for us to really understand because it lays at the very heart of why so many people are pro-Hamas and pro-Palestinian, why there are accusations of apartheid and ethnic cleansing, and what is fueling so much of the ire and the anger toward Israel. It's also at the heart of what has created this anti-Zionist narrative, and it is the very heart of what has created the story of the Palestinian people and of their victimhood. It has enraged them into this psychotic delusion of justifying terrorism. I've included a bibliography at the end of this report. It's important for you to know that this is a well-sourced report, that this isn't just coming from my own personal narrative. The problem with the Nakba is that while many of the details of what happened are true, the story behind it is absolutely a lie. First, let's go over what the Palestinian narrative is. According to the Palestinians, there was mass immigration of Jewish people into Israel. They took over the Palestinians' lands, they kicked them out, and they put them into refugee camps. The story has a lot more nuance and some really important details. Let's talk about the history of what happened. When the British created the partition plan in 1948 that created the state of Israel, 5 Arab nations around Israel attacked Israel. That's Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, plus the Arab League that was existing inside of Israel. And this wasn't just a war to try and gain back the land. A quote from Azam Pasha, who was the Secretary General of the Arab League, he says that this would be a war of extermination, a momentous massacre which will be spoken of like the Mongolian massacre and the Crusades. Please, let's keep in mind that the intention of the Arab nations was to completely obliterate and totally genocide the Jewish people. There was never any thought of the Arab nations that they had any chance of losing this. When it comes to the expulsion of the Palestinian people that were living on the land, there were 3 things that are the actual truth of what happened. 1, many of them left willingly because a war was going on. 2, some of the people were expelled by Israel. And 3, the Arab leadership told the people to leave. This is a very important part of this narrative. There is a lot of evidence from Ben Gurion and also from Golda Meir urging the Palestinian population to stay. So the word Nakba, it means catastrophe. And this is a very important fact about how this word came to be. It comes from a writer, Constantine Zurich, that when he coined the term Nakba actually refers to the failure of the Arab nations in annihilating the Jews, and not the expulsion of the Palestinian people. This is a very important distinction to understand what the original people actually felt that the catastrophe was. So why is this quote from the Arab League important, that this is a war of annihilation? I'd like to point out just how serious this threat of a war of annihilation is. Let's talk about the Mufti. The Mufti was the Palestinian leader in Jerusalem at the time of the Holocaust. He was super in with the Nazis. His desire to annihilate the Jewish people was extremely serious. In 1941, he fled to Germany, met with Hitler and Eichmann to talk about the Jewish problem. He tried to persuade Hitler to help him take care of the Jewish problem in Palestine. He also received monthly stipends from Hitler to help with the eradication of the Jewish people in that region, and also recruited an army of 20,000 Muslims to fight in the SS. If it hadn't been that Hitler was defeated in Egypt, that's exactly what would have happened. He had already started to conduct plans to build gas chambers in Jenin to recreate the German extermination process. So as you can see, the local statement of a war of annihilation was extremely real. So going back to Israel, in reaction to the war that had started in 1948, all of the surrounding countries that attacked Israel forcibly expelled their entire Jewish populations. That is true ethnic cleansing. So against all odds, when Israel was expected to lose the war, instead they won the war. And now this created a situation where there were around 500,000 to 700,000 Arabs that were expecting to ride back into Israel. These suddenly were made into refugees. Israel does face some harsh criticism for creating these refugees. But after this war that was enacted on them, the real attempts for genocide, to be quite honest, Israel didn't want to invite these hostile people that wanted to annihilate them back into Israel. I think that is understandable. And what would normally happen in a war where the other Arab nations would absorb the populations that were made refugees, none of them did. And that is how the Palestinian people were born and made to be permanent refugees. Now what's happened is all of the blame, this part of the attempted annihilation, the fact that the Arab leaders pushed these people out of their homes, all of these details are left out of the story. The mission has always been to annihilate Israel and to undermine the Jewish people and not recognize their right to their homeland. Arafat was actually very brilliant because he realized that if you cannot take Israel by force and by sword, you can do it by narrative. Yes, the Nakba was a catastrophe. The reasons for that is something that needs to be talked about and examined. It's also worth noting that there were around 160,000 Arabs that didn't flee from the land, and those are the ancestors of the 2 million Palestinian Israeli citizens who continue to live there today with full and equal rights. So yes, there was a Nakba in the sense that it was a catastrophe. It was a tragedy for them to leave their homes, to become refugees. It was a tragedy for them to not be accepted and repatriated into other countries. Maybe the most tragic thing for them is this continued narrative that keeps them in this story of victimhood and keeps them from being able to move on and thrive as a people, as they stay entrenched in this psychopathic, terroristic drive for revenge of a story that is very much a lie and keeps them in a permanent state of victimhood. As far as I see it, the Nakba of the Nakba is the story of the Nakba itself.